between having an inclusion and also having forward momentum, having a sense of progress. Because I think like what we're so often is how the process, like that consent can be a very slow process. And I think that's one of the things that we really want to emphasize is that the consent principle does not imply one kind of process. And that's kind of, I think, how the field is looking at it right now, that it's a process that happens in a group. It's a group decision-making process. And so what we've tried, and so people ask us, well, when do you use consent? And Michelle and I kind of come back to, well, when do you want to impose your view over somebody's objections in decision making? You know, when do you want to steamroll other people? And then, you know, don't use consent. But really what we're saying is like consent is a principle, and there's a lot of different ways that you can enact consent in a culture. That's not just about everybody sitting in the same room at the same time. It's not about having everybody, quote unquote, around the table, but that we can have smaller groups that are making decisions in a culture of consent, as long as that small group is aware of who their decisions impact and that they're kind of reaching beyond just who's sitting in the room as they're doing decision making, reaching beyond to people who are impacted, to engage those folks in that decision making, in the sense of being able to contribute to the development of ideas and to, you know, contribute to the development of understanding of and sense making, and also to be able to express when they have objections, when they're sensing risks, and that there's a commitment from these small teams or individuals to listen and adapt. And that's kind of the essence of working in consent, is the willingness to listen and adapt when people are expressing a sense of risk with a direction that's being taken. So you can't listen and adapt if you're not actually reaching out to folks who are impacted and thinking about who might be impacted by decisions. So that's just a little bit about what we were started with last time. Is there anything else you would want to add, Michelle, or anybody else would want to add?
Well, I'm kind of going back, and David put these this link to it's in the region, it's Slack, where I kind of went through, because I wanted to remind myself of why the conversation got sent to part 2, which was some questions that were stimulated. And so I'm going to say a couple of them, and others can, you know, go in and look. But one of them was, Lynn was curious about contextual factors for this protocol. So let's start there. Is that right, Lynn? Does that ring a bell? Do you want to add to that or expand on that?
Yeah. Well, what's coming up in my mind, so it might not be exactly on the same thread, but I just yesterday was doing a session with an organization, which is a self-regulating organization, and they have a obligation to make decisions in the public interest. So one of the things that they talk about, of course, and one of the things in the public interest is, how do you go about sort of as a decision-making group reflecting the public interest in your decision? And there's like there's a philosophy and a protocol really that you go through when you're making decisions in the public interest that require you to, you know, identify stakeholders, consult, engage. And I'm just wondering if, and this is maybe a question, is does this obligation, this felt obligation, this moral obligation to consult and to take into account, just as you've described, is that expressed, or should that, or could that be expressed in a philosophy or a policy of how we make decisions here? Like, is it just, you know, the good people around the room sort of saying we need to reach out, or is it actually embodied or put together in a commitment statement? So that's kind of what I was thinking, because in the public interest world, there are policies that tell the board or tell a regulator or tell a council that they need to go through a process to do it responsibly. And I'm wondering if this whole area lends itself to a policy or philosophical statement that the group agrees to, that is guiding in situations where there is a obligation, need, or duty to consult.
That's actually one of the issues that I see in consent also, is that people forget about the others internally. They just doesn't occur to them to talk to somebody else. There was a total quality tool that allowed sort of like a checklist that people kind of force people to think about.
Yeah.
And I found that was really useful because it encourages that. Otherwise, in the heat of the moment, people just kind of forget. It's not intentional, but it feels intentional to those who are forgotten.
Yeah, it's like it sometimes can be like, have we scoped out all those who are impacted by this? How, do we have a sense of, or do we have real information about how they would see this? What can we do to consult properly? Like, that's what I'm swimming with in this topic, is it a procedure or process, or can it also be a expressed commitment that that kicks in at a certain point of sensitivity or impact?
That's exactly what is embedded in this protocol, Lynn. Yeah. There is a step exactly. And like, when do you need to engage to identify who to include in the process and how? So there is that step of identifying who to include and framing the picture, which is the other step that people tend to gloss over, is like solving for the problem in the context of how they understand it, but not necessarily how other people would understand the context and what is the nature of the problem that we're attempting to solve, which is one of those power moves, right? Is if I can frame the narrative, right, that's how I can get my solution passed. But so yeah, absolutely, that's what this is intended to do, is to insert those steps.
Do you see it translating into a policy or commitment statement? Because I can see that it could be understood. Yeah, okay.
I love that. Yes.
I mean, we have a document that we often share with folks that you could slip right into your bylaws or your charter. Like, there's language, simple language that can put it into the agreements. And then there becomes the practice of and for these new social impact networks, when sometimes people who are in the network, who are leading, are context leaders. They're not people who've been educated in, at higher education, or that aren't, haven't been active in a board before, or that kind of level. And so part of what the protocol is for, or they're just reorganizing their organization, and you just gotta get new ways of doing things. And it's helpful to be like, okay, if this, then what? Is this the situation? Is this the situation that I'm in? And then so that's part of why it's developed. I see Brad, and I want to make sure that this piece has been satisfied. Okay. Oh.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. It's just making that connection to policy, which would, in a more established board, would be the way in which you embed it into practice. And I can see it's in there, but I would pull it out and make it into something, as you say, that slips in somewhere and becomes the way we do things here.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Brad?
Yeah, this is great. you guys should really read this IETF paper. I mean, their motto is no presidents, no kings, no voting, rough consensus and working code. And they have been doing it for 50 years, and it's completely open. And there's no voting, and it's all, and these are people who are deciding, what technology is going to be implemented for the public good across all of humanity. And yeah, so there's definitely, when I'm only halfway through it, but there's definitely, I'm curious about what they do a lot of emphasis on pattern languages. And so I think, from my perspective, like the network, how do you govern a network cooperative? Well, maybe there's something to be learned here. And I think, yeah, I think, definitely it'll inform you guys in terms of how you find consensus and how, you have 50 years of experience in working with rough consensus. And so, yeah, definitely worth looking at.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
can't wait to read it, and appreciated David's, like, seeing what was similar, like I was like, oh, this is a lot like permaculture, and like, and seeing what's not quite the same is really, and I can't
Can
thank
I-
you. Yes.
Can I just respond to that? Because actually, Brad, like when I started talking with Kalia and she was telling me about the IETF, so we started, and I went and looked into the governance, just a little Wikipedia search. And here's how I described it as like, oh, this is the mothership. That's what it felt like. It felt like this is kind of the standard and practice. So I've been doing this work so networks, right? The network form of organizing has, in our world, it's like taken hold as a concept. And so our work in governance has happened in that space because these network spaces, people working across organizations rather than within one organization, people working across organizations didn't have a way to really understand governance in that naturally non-hierarchical space, which is kind of like, right, that's the pattern that's in the IETF as well. And so it's been a piecing together, in my experience, it's been a piecing together of practices to address this space, which is heavily influenced by the internet. So that's why I say it was like, for me, it was like, oh, there's the mothership. These are the protocols. These are the ways of operating that have set in motion, right? A way of needing to operate just like technology does, right? It kind of set up a certain way of interacting that now like people are adjusting to. And so I think there's a lot to be gained by seeing, the sustainability in what the IETF is doing. I mean,
Yeah, and it's not, and Dave, I'll let you talk, but just in response, yeah, I'm not, IETF isn't a magic bullet, but it's amazing what you can learn from what they did. And actually, from my perspective, what it doesn't include right now is the network component here, because as like in the idea of the network cooperative is we're pointing to people, we're delegating to people constantly, and hopefully we're curating our delegations and our people marking, if you will, and that enables things like liquid democracy and other coordination tools that you can't take advantage of without networks. And so I think there's something really interesting to be done to learn from IETF and other models that have been working, but also incorporate networks of delegation and respect and all that. Dave?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's really, I've got to read Kalia's paper too. And I was trying to figure out if we're kind of, I mean, we're entering this problem with a particular mindset, I think. Lynn talking about boards, Tracy talking about the organizations, talking about governance. And I wonder if there's something to the internet is a product. It's a thing that was built, right? And everything else serves the thing. right? The thing comes first, right? It's the ability of data to flow kind of and be manipulated. That's what people were doing. And then they created stuff to help them make the data flow, right? But it wasn't like, oh, let's create an organization and let's get governance. It was let's make data flow and then, right? So there's a
Yeah, really good
prior,
point.
I think. And I don't know. I mean, I wish there was a ton more history about this stuff because I'd say it's a little bit, it's more like how do you know what is language? We've created language, right? And we don't even think about it. It's a product. It exists. It's been contributed to over thousands of years. We all have adopted it, right? It keeps morphing. We change it all the time, right? And it's this massive social asset, yeah, that all belongs to all of us. And we don't think about governance of, I mean, I guess in France you do, but you don't think about governance of language or anything, or we don't think about the leadership structure of language, but we still grow it and improve it and use it, and right. And it's fundamental to our operations, And so the internet, I feel like, is a little bit in that category of something that has come together from this massive contribution all over the world. And so my question has always been, how do we do it again? Right? What do we learn from that to do it again? So like, what's a regenerative future look like? Something like that. And so one little tidbit, and I wish I knew the history better. I think the IETF, right, came from what was called the Internet Working Group, the IWG, which at the very beginning, like the RFC1 is a great read. If you get a chance to look it up. The request for comments that defined how they connected to the first two computers together, right? So 50 plus years ago. And he writes it to the IWG. It's a memo to the IWG. There is no IWG. It's not an organization. There is no governance. It's kind of just the world. Here's a memo to the world, right? And the IETF, I believe, over the course of the 50 years has concretized and organized and become an organization. And I'm going to learn a bunch about it when I read Kalia's paper. But even 12, 15 years ago, whenever I wrote my paper, it existed. If you removed the IETF, the internet doesn't stop, right? It won't break it. It doesn't govern the internet, right? So anyway, so I would be careful about our biases, maybe, is one of the things. I don't think it's about the organization. I think it's about the product. And I don't know how often we have this kind of a framework. I mean, where we set out to build a product. What we want is the product. The organizational stuff around it is just a way to get to the product.
I put myself in the stack, and what I think of that when you say that is shared purpose. We have a shared vision, we have a shared mission, we have a shared purpose. But I have a question, and I haven't thought deeply about it because I just read your paper and I can't wait to read this other paper, but I'm interested in a parallel between this idea of forking, of like that it's ideally you don't want to fork, but sometimes forking is the right thing. And I'm trying to notice a parallel between what happens, in like a social impact network. Because with a social impact network, it's people's lives, it's living systems, it's places being taken care of or not, and a shared purpose there. But then, so for when I think of it right now, I think of like the forking. That would be the parallel, or the analogy would be the forking is people no longer share the purpose. Right? They've realized they don't actually share that purpose. They have a different purpose, and now they're self-selecting.
It might be more. It could be as simple as the disagreement over the way to get to the purpose, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yes.
just, I think it should go this way, and you think it should go that way, and we disagree, I think. And, it's a disagreement at a sufficiently high level that you're willing to absorb a fairly high cost. So I'm not sure it changes intent necessarily, but it might. It also allows you to say, oh, this is something I could really use in this other way that was totally not intended, right? So it's something of value that I can reuse and in a different fashion and take it in a totally different direction. And it allows that as well. So it's kind of, the openness and the flexibility of a lot of these resources. And as you're talking, Michelle, one of the things that made me think is that, like, I believe one of the things that defines kind of regeneration versus like sustainability is this notion of extraction that you're trying to, regenerative is not extractive. I think forking is one of the things that discourages extraction. Because if somebody tries to capture a code base or something and charge too much for it, somebody else can take that same code base and offer it for free.
Right.
And so there's a pressure, a tension against extraction that comes from the possibility of forking.
Cool. Now I see a stack, and on this particular thing, I want to just sort of say, Tracy, are you okay to wait, or do you have something? Okay, so I see Catherine.
Oh, I don't want Tracy to wait. I want to get into it, but I really think that what Dave brought up is actually quite brilliant and something that we don't pay attention to or we gloss over, that this shared purpose is really what trumps everything else. We get so caught in focusing on like governance or the economy, and those are not things, actually. They're routes to something. And we forget that. We get caught in it instead of paying attention to what it is that we're trying to accomplish, using that as the tool that it is. And I think that's just a really, really key thing to pay attention to. Because we can elaborate on the tool, we can play with the tool, we can make the tool better or worse or more complicated or more simple or whatever. And it has nothing to do with accomplishing the purpose, really. Other things get in there. We get clever with our words and our thoughts, and all this other kind of stuff overlays what we're actually trying to do. So that's just, that's something to really be kept in our minds as we talk about this, I think. So thanks, Dave, for that. Really appreciative.
I made a note in there, Catherine. Thank you for bringing that out. Hello, Brad. I see your hand.
Yeah, briefly, Dave, it's a really good point about the internet. And actually, I forget where it was, but I just saw, I'll try and find it, but there was a great video where one of the key points he said was, why do we say the web instead of a web, right? Like, and we do it because, I mean, he says it's because you have fixable addresses. I mean, it's kind of a nerdy thing, but basically there's something that was achieved in the web that was universal, and it wasn't about specific values or anything. And in fact, that's one of the things that, well, it is anyway. But I just thought it was a really interesting point. Like, how do you make a public good that is that solves the problem so well that nobody tries to make an alternative to it?
And I don't know if you guys, I mean, just like a side tech note here or something like that, because there's one of the things that's fascinating is it's what we call the internet, right, is actually just a whole bunch of stuff all bundled together. And you can think of it in layers, kind of. So the internet, the TCP/IP layer, means data can move across wires, basically. And then the web is like a layer that runs on top of that allows us to have like websites and stuff, right? But it's not, so the web is not the internet technically, it's another layer. And the web is just one generation of many different things that allowed us to coordinate data across. It's just the one that kind of won, right? But there were other attempts. And it's something about the generative, the internet just keeps generating new stuff. or new stuff keeps getting built upon it. And that's part of what's magical about it. There was the web came, 30 years after the internet came, right? I mean, it was a continuing innovation cycle that's been going on. And that's, so that's part of this, like it couldn't have been planned in advance part, nobody knew where we were going to get.
Go ahead, Tracy.
So I'm gonna offer kind of a contrasting point of view to the point that you were making, David. It's telling me it's gonna lower my hand. That's great. Okay. Because I think that, well, first of all, I don't see governance as different than purpose. I see governance as the way that we navigate toward purpose. So that's the first thing. If there isn't a sense of purpose, then all roads are equal, right? It's when we have a sense of purpose that we can actually design ways to try to maximize the realization of that purpose. So that to me is governance. So I find myself confused when people make those into separate things. But yeah, and I also think that the internet was very much governed. Lots of decisions were made. I think language is governed. If you want to think about it in terms of lots of decisions are made in terms of what gets put into a dictionary, what gets taught to young people in schools. So there are like a lot of different, it's not one organization, but there's a lot of ways. I mean, I grew up, right, with an understanding of rules about how the English language can be used, how it can be written. So I think I do agree that the organization is not the point. And we don't focus on governance. I don't focus on governance to make the organization the point. I think the form needs to follow function. The point is the point. The point is what you're wanting to achieve. Always. And I think that it absolutely becomes a barrier if people get focused on the process and not on the on the issue, on what they're trying to do together. And I will also say I've seen a lot of groups get lost when their processes aren't clear. I see a lot of damage and harm that comes from the processes staying invisible. So I see a lot of power, like shadow power dynamics happen when people don't make the processes explicit. There isn't a way to call out unfairness and injustice if we don't have like a clear policy structure, something that people can point to that can say, this is out of alignment with our values. This is out of alignment with how we said we were going to work together. Like in the absence of that, I see a lot of groups cycle in conflict, groups that are trying to achieve a purpose together. So the GRC is a little different. Like the GRC's purpose is around creating, just as an example, like the GRC's purpose is probably a little more simple because it's around creating a shared learning experience, right? Without any particular curriculum or way of doing that, but just creating space for people to gather and learn from each other. We're not trying to create an outcome, really. Like we're not trying to create any kind of a specific outcome or change in the world. And so it's just different. It really depends on like the kind of governance that you would use, I think depends on the context that you're in, depends on the culture that you're in. I think language is always a challenge. Like I am in groups that love using certain words, and I'm in groups that the same words are like toxic to them. And so it's like this protocol is really an attempt to get at like what I hear back from folks who are trying to operationalize their values who are trying to do something different than what we have been doing. If we're trying to change our habits around, like, to go from the culture that we're in now to a regenerative culture, I do think that we need to make explicit what that means. I do think that it's going to require us to change, like, actually what we're doing. Like, we have habits that are like, we are the systems that we want to change. We are the systems. So, like, we have to actually very intentionally change the way that we do things and our habits and our patterns to be able to get different results. And so if you're trying to do that collectively, like, I believe it's important, again, to make it explicit so that we can keep reorienting to what it is that we're trying to do. And I think, yeah, the internet, the RFC is a governance, the request for comment is a governance tool. It's a mechanism. So yes, if governance or process or conversations about process start to take over, I agree. Like, and so one of the truisms that we use is, you know, just enough structure. That's all you need, is just enough structure, and an ability for that to evolve, for the structure to evolve as the initiative evolves. But I think it's like, I think all things are being governed. Like, it's all being governed. It's just like, we're not always explicit about where power lies and how to access that power in a just way. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, I mean, I kind of probably, I don't know, we probably quibble with the definition of governance in there at some point, because at some points it's spread it thin enough it disappears. And I think to the extent that the point is that if people are cooperating, there are terms of cooperation, and if you want to call that governance, okay. You know, we talk about the free market, and I think some people have a notion that the free market has no governance, but clearly it does have governance. But the notion is that there's transactions that can take place that don't require, you know, a board kind of. So I mean, just you know, I think there's a lot of layers to that. I mean, this notion that language is governed, it's like, okay, I guess, but I mean, we don't have the English society enforcing laws or rules, right? I mean, it's a much more diffuse kind of governance. And so I would say the internet example, the governance has emerged in reaction to the work. It certainly didn't come first. Somebody didn't set up an organization to govern the internet. It's emerged out of that process. And so the RFCs have evolved from, you know, a memo to anybody to having, you know, a database, to having an organization that controls the database, and that can, you know, right? I mean, but it's been in reaction to, I think, not prior. So anyway, yes, I think I agree, but it's, you know, it's not governance first, I would argue. And I would say, I guess one of the last things I think very often on the internet, I was trying to figure out how much this is true. My theory is kind of the internet was built by a lot of autistic white guys. And that's one of the reasons we haven't done a lot more of them, is, you know, it's a very specific community that cooperated to build this thing. And it's hard to replicate a community like that. So we can cut that out of the video later. But a lot of times I think they were solving their own problem, right? They weren't out there trying with the intent of solving other people's problems. They were solving their own problem and using these tools to do that.
I think there's a lot of similarity there in the social impact networks that we're working with. They're trying to solve a problem. I had another thing. I raised my hand, but I can't remember what it was. So I'm gonna let you go ahead, Nikki.
I just wanted to respond to David's. Oh, sorry.
I just want to say, the folks who've asked for this language, I'm gonna get it, put a link and give it to you.
I just wanted to respond to David's comment about the internet being invented by a bunch of autistic white guys. And I just want to add that I agree with you. There was not enough autistic women in that.
I mean, I in like that paper, I have a table of like the internet pioneers. They're all men. And I mean, there's clearly I have a bias where I focus on men more than women. And I acknowledge it. And still, I don't really know who I should have put on that list. I don't know what women I should have put on that list. It's
I was gonna,
scary.
I was gonna actually note that this is probably the first meeting, the only meeting that I can think of where men are outnumbered.
There you go. There's
Gosh, I
that.
wonder why women want better governance more so than men.
Oh, I think we're all in so much pain over it though. I wish I could think of the thing that I was trying to say. Oh, well. Oh, I know, it was probably contained in some of these questions. Maybe.
I think the question of power is what's important to me about governance, and really what motivates me is like, I just want to like circle back to that, because this protocol that we're offering is in response, like I said, to people wanting to change how power is experienced, um, wanting to make manifest this idea of nothing about us without us. So it's people wanting to live into their values and not having clear enough sense of how to do that, or you know, again, to practice into different habits. But to me, the essence, I think that's why I have, like, that's why I feel like governing is kind of like the word power, like power being the ability to do work. Like power in itself isn't any particular kind of power. It's not any particular, right? It's kind of it just is. And I feel like governance is really, to me, it's just like governance gives form to power. It gives form to the power relationships. So it's like as people are expressing power, I would like go really broad and say like that is a kind of governance, right? That is how I think of governance, is how people go about using power. And because you can govern yourself. It's not a board, it's not a particular, it's not having an organization, it's not government. Like I think all of those are just forms that governance might take. It might be more formal, it might be less formal, but like as people are navigating toward a purpose, like I think governing is just like I just think of it that much more broadly. And I think there's a lot of ways that people do that implicitly. And that's why I really value making it explicit, just for the reasons that we're saying, is that people, particularly people who've been marginalized, have spoken about the benefit of having this be explicit so that people can be held accountable. Because without that explicitness, like that accountability can be very difficult to yeah. And I see a lot of shadow power dynamics going on. So that's what really like deeply motivates me in this conversation.
And to just be clear, like in social, it's what's similar with the paper I read of yours, David, and the EITF, and that trajectory is that our recommendation, which is a little bit different from the sociocratic way of doing things. We still use a lot of the sociocratic work, but the thing that's a little bit different with us is like with these social impact networks is that the amount of governance that gets designed is the amount that's needed right now. Like, what are our agreements right now? How do we then go out and test? It's similar, like now we're going to go out and see how it's working, and always with the iterative, knowing that everything's going to be iterative. And those RFCs are very light proposals. So like there's no place in which we would say, here's your governance in a box, just do this. Because it's not what people are wanting to do. They want to do their thing. They want to move towards their shared purpose, and like, okay, so what do we need right now to move us forward? And oh, now we've hit a place where some work isn't happening. There's leakage, there's work not happening. Oh, well, you know what? Nobody's role. It's nobody's job to do that. Nobody's taken that on. Nobody's said, so, or, oh, wow, we didn't know that piece of our workflow together, or our process hadn't been thought of. So now we do that. And I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, David, but when I think about the marketplace and the difference in the marketplace, as you said in last week, the market makes lots of things, and a lot of them die, and a few get adopted and they move forward. And in a social impact network where we need all these people in order to move this impact forward, we can't afford to just let folks opt out unless if they share the purpose. So that it's not quite the same as really a marketplace that can, like, we need everybody to be involved. And now ideas get chosen and adopted. Like, I love this idea of the Gmail, the address protocol, how email addresses work. It's like, there was no need, like, it works plenty good enough. Somebody else might have thought of some other different way, but there just was no pain around it. Like, it's fine. Let's just keep going with this. There might have been a better way. Anyway, those were just a couple of my thoughts I'm throwing into the
well, and that's probably a pretty good example of rough consensus running code. I mean, like, he suggests it and it works and everybody says fine. I mean, it kind of, he implements it and then it just gets adopted, and this is not really a process or a review or anything, but it just, And I was wondering, Tracy, so I came at this wondering, how do we do large scale collaboration? Right, kind of, that's the framing of my question. So GRC is one of my plays to engage in large scale collaboration or for a regenerative future. And I was thinking, I mean, I think language is an example of large scale cooperation. That's why I use that as an example. Or in the internet, right? I mean, there's like all this collaboration happened and we got this thing. And how did it happen? And so the document for me is like, these open systems, I think, are amenable to large scale cooperation. So that's kind of where I was heading with it. And I haven't really thought of it in terms of power. But one of the things that made me think is that, especially in a world where you have a lot of things that have kind of zero marginal cost, the digital stuff where the cost of replication is really cheap, means if I'm Microsoft, I try to capture all of that and monetize it and make Bill Gates really rich, right? But if I'm Linux, I make that widely available to everybody, and anybody can reuse it over again, right? Over and over again. And so, and I can do both. I can afford to do both because the marginal cost is close to zero, right? So I can share a copy of Linux for nothing, or I can keep my copy of Windows and try to charge $100 for it. And, and there's the difference between extraction and not extraction. But it also changes power. So a fork is something that abandons the opportunity to have power, I think, right? Because the power comes from controlling the asset. So if the asset can't be controlled in some sense, if you don't like my idea and you use a different idea, or if I try to charge for my idea and there's a cheaper idea, right? This is the market phenomenon. This is why power moves. Or one of the things that makes power moves. Anyway, then I do think that you could probably do a power analysis of a bunch of the internet decisions, and there are power implications. I just never thought to do it.
We've got a few more minutes, and there's a request to spend a couple of minutes at the end to show something that somewhat answers your question regarding Gaia.net.
It also relates to GRC directly. So.
Yeah. What is it that you're wanting to share?
I'll do the 2 minutes right now if that's okay.
Sure. I mean,
right.
I don't see any objection.
So, first of all, I'm still very much committed to working with GRC on all the stuff we've been talking about over the last couple of months in terms of, experimenting with the network cooperative, et cetera, et cetera. So most of what I've been doing is reacting or working on things to kind of smooth it, because thankfully you, especially Michelle and others, and Nikki have helped beta test it. And so we're working through a lot of the kinks on that. But I wanted to show you this because that's part of it. So portable communities is a big part of what the reason for that, green check and having an interoperable identifier that works across communities. And so this is an actual this is a Venn diagram of a bunch of communities. If I go to now.is and look at the go to the network and then say choose, I might have to re-log in. So I've been building these communities, and I think I've told you about this. So here's the one from Global Regen Collab. So this was made from the Airtable from the GRC member list, okay? And what we get is all the people that we could get LinkedIn names for, okay? And sorted by how interconnected they are, their network centrality within the group of GRC. So, and then if you'll notice on these groups, there's a whole bunch of other ones, and GaiaNet is one, okay? GaiaNet we got from a list that Dan Gorder sent, just full names, no LinkedIn names, but we were able to cross-correlate most of those names with their LinkedIn account because we have this large database of LinkedIn connections. So what you're seeing here is GRC has 1,006 users. GaiaNet has 131. The intersection is 16 users. All right, and this is basically the Venn diagram of each of these. So if I click on GaiaNet, I can see. So the Venn doesn't work when you have so much overlap. So for instance, GaiaNet overlaps with Limicon, but you can't see it because it doesn't fit in the way Venn diagrams work. But anyway, that's just what I wanted to say, Nikki, is that GaiaNet is one community, and it's not currently interoperable with GRC or with GameB or MetaGov, right? Because they don't share an interoperable identifier. And so one important step is for us to agree. In this case, the interoperable identifier is a LinkedIn username. And Green Check is about making it easy for people to create a proof of humanity that's also an interoperable identifier that links LinkedIn, my Twitter, my Facebook, my phone number, my email into a cloud of attributes that I can prove I own, and then that becomes something like we can do Boolean operations across communities. Okay, I think that's probably a little over 2 minutes, but.
I just want to thank you for that. I actually, so what ended up happening was there was like a social area of the festival that was set aside. It actually started as a smoking section, but then everybody started going there. And so we started calling it the Academy because it ended up being a networking space. And so we nicknamed it the Academy Smokers Welcome. And
where was this?
This was at the Gathering of Tribes, the
okay.
last couple of weeks.
Oh, great. I want to hear about that. Maybe
yeah.
we'll do it one-on-one.
Yeah. And I'm trying to get Joe to do a shared retrospective for the community. But ultimately, somebody asked, where are the networks and the networks of networks? And so I talked about what you were doing, and the guy from GaiaNet says, that's exactly what we're doing. We're about to release an app. We've been running it in beta. And, the more of us we have, the more the web grows, and we can just catch more, flies that are ready to be in the regenerative space. So it's not even competitive. But anyway, so I just wanted to bring that up. I do have to go and jump onto a call that I run every week outside of GRC that's related to the Regenerators Academy. But thank you for explaining that. And thank you for this very rich conversation. and David's insights on the white autistic dudes creating the internet. I'll thank you very much for today.
So thank you,
Thanks,
Nikki.
Can I just reflect Catherine's comment also, is that I would also love to hear a reflective on the gathering. If it's in, I would make space for it here, or if y'all are going to do something for the GRC as a whole.
Yeah,
like, excited.
I am trying to put something together with Joe and a couple of others that will talk about that. But I think we're all pensive about talking about it because things didn't go as they were advertised. And I'll just leave it at that for right now. It wasn't necessarily the best experience for most people.
Oh, really?
Do
you remember the guy's name from GaiaNet, Nikki?
I don't. I got so many names and they were all oral. And if you don't write it down, I don't remember it. So
Was he
like,
Dutch?
if I can't read it.
Was he Dutch?
I think so. I mean, trying to figure out every accent in Europe in a space like that is really hard for me.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up on that one too, because I don't think Dan's involved with GaiaNet anymore, Brad. And I think
Dan
there was a
Gorder?
backstory.
Okay.
I don't know the backstory, so I'd love to gossip.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not seeing him on their
Okay.
page.
Not a surprise.
And Nikki, if you all are willing to have some vulnerability, I think when things flop, it's the best learning experience, and that would be awesome.
Oh, absolutely. I just want to make sure I'm not just coming in with my bias, and that Joe can talk about how it impacted him or
Let's get Lauren too, right?
Yeah,
Which
Lauren
Joe are you
too.
talking about? Which
Joe
Joe?
Culhane.
Okay.
Joe Culhane from the Institute of Relational Being, and he they just had Schumacher College shut down very suddenly by the British government, and so they're scrambling right now to raise funding to get it launched privately, and also sort of like mourning the loss of one of the higher ups in the college that had a heart attack in the middle of it all and passed away. So it's a really big deal in his life right now, in addition to an international move with parents that have dementia and stuff like that. So he's in a bit of a rough time, but I'm sure I can get together like Elisa and Lauren and others to talk about their experiences, and myself and a couple of others like Josh Prieto that can discuss it from the camp leader and collaborator perspective as opposed to just attendee.
Thanks, everybody. I know people are needing to go.
Sorry. Yeah, I gotta go.
I'm curious, David, why you posted this request for proposals.
Yeah, so this seems to be another generation of this open source ecosystem program that NSF is doing, and it seems to be particularly around security issues, which, I mean, I don't know if we want to ever think again about doing something with the social graph kind of stuff, Brad, but it does seem like if we wanted to do a grant proposal around security of personal information for a shared graph, that's pretty rich. And so there's funding available. It's due in January.
Right. Well, you got one more minute. I can show you what I've been doing on that front, Dave, because it was motivated by, I'm going to be talking to Kalia about it as soon as she wakes up from her trip. But just briefly, let's see, can I share that? Let's see. I think I have to.
Bye, Tracy.
Bye.
That's such a rich conversation. I think I was enriched. But while you're looking, just thinking about where, like, one of the things that came up was like, what is a protocol? What constitutes a protocol? It's different from a process. It's different from we didn't kind of drill down into that, but still something to think about. We can think about. Go ahead, Brad.
So this is work towards that, what you were just talking about, Dave. And it's actually, so these are all those communities that I was talking about earlier. And so the idea here is, so the colors relate to who has the right to see these people, okay? So if you'll see down here, some are private, some are green, some are pink, and some are yellow. I don't know, there's a yellow one in there somewhere. There's yellow. And so pink are the people that only I can see. They're my connections. Okay. Green is people that someone in this community, Global Regen Collab, has shared their connections with the community. So I think that's probably Carolina or Michael Grossman. And then yellow is someone who's shared their connection, who is connected to someone who has shared all their connections, the way Michelle, you and 10 others of us have done in that experiment, right? So if I go ahead and say, you know, add my connections, then all the pink ones become visible to everybody else in the community. So anyway, I just wanted to make that point that it's pretty straightforward to kind of sort by who can I see because they're connected directly to me, who can I see because someone in the community has shared it with the community, and who can I see because someone has shared all their connections with everyone. Yeah, I think that there's
and so I think, I mean, I'm putting it in the frame of the NSF grant, but I think actually questions that really have to be asked is in some sense like what's reusable, who has permissions to do stuff. So I assume,
right.
you know, you could open source the code, for example, but you can't really open source the entire database, and then people have to be
Right.
able to opt out of different parts of it. And you know, this who
Right.
decides who can see what kind of question, I assume is that would be a topic in this grant, I think.
Yeah.
And then to the extent that like the database itself can't be shared, how is it secured in an open community? So
And I think the quick answer to that is each of us owns our own connection. So I can delete if I added them before, I can delete them, and it just sets a few flags and unsets a few flags, and then basically I've removed my edges from the collective commons.
so you removed your directional edge, but if I connected back to you, my edge would still be there, right?
Yes.
So I
Now
mean,
I can then say, hey, I don't want to be anywhere, and your connections or anybody else's to me will just disappear.
so I don't own the fact that I know you.
You own the fact that you know me, and that's a policy issue. Like, should I be able to
But which is
point
exactly
to
the NSF grant would be around setting these policy
right?
issues. And
Yeah,
you could do
yeah,
surveys and you could do case studies and you know, I don't know. You could write
yeah,
code. You could write code that would enforce policy issues, I think.
yeah,
That
yeah.
kind of thing.
Cool.
Julio, I
Thanks,
just
Brad.
put GaiaNet's internet. I just put GaiaNet's. I found the right address for
Yeah.
GaiaNet. Put it in there just so it's in the chat for others who might be interested. I think next week
Next week,
is
planning week.
next week is planning meeting. So we've got some planning we've got some things on tap. If anybody has anything they want us to bring, I mean, you know, if Kalia could come back and talk, we could expand this, but yeah.
Yeah, you know, I would love to have Kalia talk about that document. So
Yeah.
Jeff,
100 pages is a lot for
now
me.
that we got her here, if she could come, that would be amazing. Here's the
day.
link.
I have
Here's
a
the link.
session. I have a session on living, you know, that questions of living systems in the boardroom kind of idea on October 9th. If that's a good date for her, I'd be happy to relinquish it because I'm pretty interested in. That's an amazing document. I look at it. Yeah.
I just put in the planning doc for everybody so that, you know, go ahead and click on it just so you have it and you know, bookmark it however you want to, because that's where if you have a suggestion, please put it there. Or if you need to just, you know, Slack me, that's fine, or David, but that's the doc where we're capturing all that work. So trying to be have a little bit of a system.
And the more that the entries in the planning doc can be pasted into the calendar invite, the better, right? So
yeah,
if
the more we
they
just
can actually be enough that they don't have to be lengthy, but just complete.
I think mine's good to go if we do go ahead. I
On
think
the
I'll
9th,
work
okay.
on it on that basis. Yeah.
Right. We want it to be intriguing. We want enough to intrigue folks who would be attracted.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks for looking at our consent decision-making protocol and bringing so much feedback and so much great insight. And please send more as we continue to.
Really appreciate it today. And like the resources that I get here are just so unusually fantastic. So thank you. And thanks, Brad. Good work. Carry on, man.
Carry on. I'm excited to see this build.
Yeah, me
Always
too.
good to see you, Miguel.
Take
Always good
care.
to see you.
Bye, everybody.
Nice to see you. See you next week. Thank you.
Good to see you, David. I'm so glad I read it. I'm very intrigued now.
Thank you. You're sweet. I never write very much, so that's all I've ever produced. So it's nice that you looked at it.
Well, it's great. It really, I mean, I spent the better part of yesterday afternoon reading it and highlighting it. And it was not, I mean, a chunk of, it was over an hour. It was some time to dedicate to it, but I really wanted to have shared, I wanted to have absorbed and have access to the things that you're trying to say, and then to see what are the contrasts, because there's here's some things I loved. I was able to see, so I'm an MVC person. I don't know, if you know much about nonviolent communication.
Okay.
But the language of needs and the idea is that, and it's similar to what Catherine was saying, like the difference between strategies and needs. I need you to pick up your socks is actually not a need. But my need for order is a need, right? And you picking up your socks is a strategy I'm proposing to help meet my need for order, right? So we never argue at the level of needs. We're actually conflicting always only at the level of strategies. So I was able to pick out so much. I was like, yeah, this is speaking to needs. Like
I see.
Was people were proposing things and they were speaking to and satisfying needs. And once the need is satisfied, there's not necessarily a need to satisfy it more, or, you know what I mean? Like compete over whether or not it's good enough. It's good enough, it's working great. Let's just move on to the next thing we want to do. And because it's open source and nobody's trying to own it and sell it and extract it, then you don't get the need to have a different one, a better one, right? It's like, yeah, works great.
Although if you clearly see today that people are trying to create extraction on top of it, right? You never get, I think, rid of that desire.
No.
So it's an ongoing.
Certainly not in a system where so many of people's needs are met through the strategy of money.
Yeah.
Right? Because money's not a need. Money's a strategy.
Yeah, that's a really helpful way to say it. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. So that was one thing that I remember. It was like, that was one of the things. And then some of the other things I could see, I was like, that relates to the permaculture. There's a permaculture principle that relates to that.
See, I haven't done a translation like that either. That would be really interesting.
So when I see that, I'm like we're talking at the same level of principles, and now we're talking at the same level of what creates regenerative. And I love seeing those correspondences because I think NVC is a regenerative practice.
Yeah.
And it's based on these principles. Consent is a regenerative practice.
Yeah.
And objections happen when people's needs aren't getting met. And a good process, an explicit process for consent decision-making amongst folks who are learning, right? Who see the importance of relationship and continuing relationship, right? That the relationship is going to be the thing that generates that. When a consent, then what is an objection? An objection is needs are not going to be met. I object to this proposal the way it's written because needs are not going to get met. I see a risk of people's needs not getting met, or of an organization's needs not getting met, like they have. So all I'm saying is I love, like when I see these correspondences, I start to go, yes, yes, yes. And then I get curious, like, what's different over here? Ooh, what's different over there?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway, it's very exciting. I'm glad I spent the time.
Well, thank you.
I am sure that I will be digging into it more. I'm definitely going to be now that I have access to Kalia's paper.
Yeah,
Definitely
I gotta look at
excited
that too.
seeing the correspondence of all of that. And because I'd love to spend time making that translation, I wonder like, why? What would it serve except for my own,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like,
curiosity?
one thing I feel like, like the world is moving into a new paradigm, and regeneration, but the fact that you have so many capable people who like are well fed and healthy around the world, I mean, it's dramatically different than it was a few years ago. And kind of our problem solving base is much larger than it used to be. And so our strategies need to be much more inclusive than they used to be,
They do.
and
Because
so
many of those
we have to
things
change
that
our governance structures.
we really do. And we need to spread that idea out of what's like one of the struggles I have is like this idea that governance is not, in fact, I'm about to make a little video. I'm starting to do videos. I'm starting to produce videos around our FAQs and stuff to have out. But one of the things is like, governance is not just what boards do. It's not just what, it's not just what governments do. Like this idea of we're all, like, and that we're all doing it all the time. It's happening whether you have said it's happening or not. Right? Like there is a governance happening. Is it the governance you want? Is it the way that you want to be
That's a good way
working?
to say it.
And to be like there's a way for us to govern in our context that, like I'm saying us, like my neighborhood or my team or whatever, for us to govern that works for our context, that has similar principles, meets the needs. And then, then how do we connect that and govern that? What I would like to disrupt is the idea that this is something, this governance in a box idea, this idea that like what we're adopting are some practices that are just and it's just enough. This same idea of just enough. That's a permaculture principle. Work from a controlled front. Just go as far as you need to, right? And then observe and interact, and then you go further. Anyway, I just get excited. I love seeing these correspondences. They seem valuable for
Yeah, no,
people
I
who
feel the
haven't,
same way. Yep. Yeah, they're really fun.
it's valuable. It seems like it could be helpful. Anyway, there you go.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, and thanks for running these sessions because I guess, I mean, I feel this, it's like I get a lot. I really enjoy coming every week. So
I'm getting more and more. And now that we've got just that tiny bit of governance, right? We've just got a tiny bit. Like we've got a tiny, just what we needed. It was within our capacity. We took we took a day a week. We plan it together. We throw it out there. People come or they don't. And, that's very like open space technology. That reminds me of open space, which is another regenerative.
yeah.
And, even if it was just me here, I could do my own thinking about it. But eventually it'd be like, oh, this isn't serving anybody. Is it still serving me? Right. So, but people come. Now, if I can just get better about making sure, and I'm committed to getting better, making sure that there's text in the planning doc that you can use to like.
Well, and your Slack post was like so meaty that I don't think we're gonna have that every week, but that was a really helpful kind of overview of what the conversation could be about, or like 16 conversations. I mean, there were a bunch of conversations.
A bunch of conversations we can go off on there,
Yeah.
and I wanted folks to come, and I wanted us to like jump in immediately without having to cover it because we have so little time, right? So when I went back, it refreshed me, and so then putting it in there as a part 2.
Fantastic.
Yes, yeah, and maybe I'll do the same thing on the open source thing because I think we're ready to start scheduled to do that.
Hey,
Have a
totally random thing.
Yes.
Are you paying attention to Kevin Jones's event in Asheville, the neighborhood economics event?
I am paying attention to
Oh.
it. I'm hoping to offer something. I helped him. Get ready for a meeting with Warren Wilson College. And you know, Kevin's one of those thinkers, like, he kind of starts with the detail thing, and he's like this, it was starting with this, like, this currency idea and what it could be. And I like pieced apart, just listening and pieced apart, and sort of just facilitated him and pieced apart. And I'm like, what is it? Who do you need to talk to? What's the decision that needs to get made? And who's the makers of those decisions? And what do they need to know to make that decision? Because it just, you know, he fire hoses.
Being a Kevin whisperer is probably a special art. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think I like annoyed him some because I was trying to like, I was like, hang on, now tell me what. And then but I found, like, when one conversation, I just was putting it in the text. I was like, okay, here, Kevin. Because it was like the meeting he was trying to get set up, that it was not about the current, like, the currency happens way down the road after this decision is even met and implemented. It's like,
That makes sense.
don't confused customer never buys, Kevin. Confused customer never buys.
Nice. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just want
but
to make
I
sure it was on
plan
your.
to be there. I hope to be able to offer something of value to it. I think it's really valuable. I'd like to contribute if there's a contribution that is ready to be received. So we'll see if I was thinking I need to get back with him and say, hey, how are we? Are we okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did I annoy you too much?
Yeah.
I know. But he needed, I mean, I'm not sorry.
Yeah.
Like, I was there in the conversation, being able to be like, okay, here's your ask.
Yeah.
This is your ask. Don't confuse things. Anyway. Love you. Appreciate
All
you.
right. Love you too. Take care.
Later.
Bye bye.
Bye.